Hello and welcome to Advancement Tech. Just give me a few moments and I'll make sure that the stream is working properly. So just make sure the screen's being updated and that the chat is working. All right, looks like it's pretty good. Welcome to Advancement Tech. So this episode is what is a VPN and do I need one? My name is Preston Jameson and this is episode 10. So Advancement Tech, we discuss how to use technology in fundraising, advancement, as well as nonprofits. So welcome again. Thank you for attending. I'm going to have a brief background about myself, about 15 to 20 minutes of education, and then there will be time for a Q&A period. This is a live show, and we're streaming it on YouTube, so I am monitoring the chat. You can feel free to ask questions through there, and I will check the chat periodically. You do need a YouTube channel account if you want to chat, though, and you need to be able to log in. All right, so who am I? Again, my name is Preston Jameson. I've worked at 2 different universities over 12 years. At those universities, I oversaw development and advancement services, or development services, advancement services. Since then, I founded a company, developed a product called Advancement Form that does online giving and event registration. Okay, so VPN. So a VPN means a virtual private network. And this is the definition from Wikipedia. Basically, it extends a private network across a public network, for example, the internet. It enables users to send and receive data across these shared networks, like the internet, as if their computer devices were directly connected to the private network. Applications running across this virtual private network may benefit from the functionality, security, and management of the private network. So basically, it's as if you are on your own private network, but it's kind of virtual and it's taking place between 2 points. Now, encryption is common, though not an inherent part of a VPN connection. But usually every single VPN that you will set up or use as a service, they do encrypt the data as it's passing between the networks. And it doesn't even have to be a network. It can be one single machine to a central network. So I do have a diagram from Wikipedia. So for example, this is the main office or the head office. And this assumption is that it's an internet VPN. So this is the VPN server of the head office. Now you can set up a VPN server in a regional office that will essentially create this virtual private network through the internet or other public networks. You can have another regional office with another VPN server that does the same thing, or you could have VPN clients those are clients that can connect to this virtual network. So at your home, your mobile device, laptop, etc., and they're classifying these as remote or roaming users. And historically, this was done because it enables you to do file sharing as you would normally would in the office or other types of access to information. Okay, so that's pretty much what a virtual private network is. And one of its main jobs is to secure your communication between whatever device you're using and the VPN server that you're connecting to or VPN service provider, because nowadays, there are actually VPN service providers that people can connect up to as opposed to having it be a corporate network. So by setting up this VPN, information cannot be seen in transit between your device and the VPN server. However, if you're communicating with something else after the VPN server, then those protections aren't afforded. And I'll show a diagram a little bit later about that. Now, the other benefit of using is that it cannot see the sites you visit when you're using a VPN, meaning like if you're at a home network, your internet service provider, your ISP, can't see what you're visiting when you're using a VPN because essentially it's an encrypted tunnel of information that it can't see. Or if you go to a public Wi-Fi, they can't see what sites you're visiting because it's being encrypted by this VPN. And I just made this point, but basically there's no additional security after you leave the VPN server or the server provider. In other words, if you use a VPN and you eventually want to go to Microsoft.com, for example, to search for something, those VPN protections aren't afforded after the fact. It's only between your client, your device, and the VPN server. Once you start traveling around the internet or other places, the VPN protections no longer apply, essentially. And I'll have a diagram that explains that. Okay, the other benefit of a VPN is that it can hide your IP address and or your location, meaning that when you're visiting another site, the IP that you present is not of your own device, but it's of something on the VPN, is usually the IP address that's being presented. So you can't be tracked on other sites via an IP address. And this also allows you to get around geolocation restrictions. And that would potentially enable you to access sites that are blocked for some reason. So if you have interest in doing that, based on where your geolocation is, maybe your IP address is excluded from accessing something, a VPN can get around that situation, or could potentially get around that situation. Okay, so when thinking about a VPN, and if you should implement one for privacy and security reasons, it kind of brings up the question is, who do you trust? So for example, do you trust your ISP? So they are going to know the sites you visit, not necessarily the information contained therein, depending if you're only accessing sites like websites that use HTTPS. They can't look at the contents, but they can tell you visited site X or site Y or site Z, for example. And sometimes they can't even know what page you're visiting there, but just know that you visited that site. Now, if you choose to get a VPN, are you going to be trusting your VPN more? Because essentially all that information that the ISP could know about you, well, now your VPN knows about you. They know what sites you're visiting, etc. And what kind of logging and tracking do they have? There are some free VPN solutions, but you need to be aware of free solutions because that means they're making money somewhere else, usually on the data you may be providing. So if you're going to look into a VPN solution, be sure to look into who owns and operates that VPN server, or service. What country are they, and can you identify the owners? Because a lot of people are using some of these VPN services as a way to afford themselves privacy, and sometimes those VPN providers, they try to be private themselves. So you want to assess the service to see how much you trust using them. Another consideration was where are they located. Some of these VPN providers, service providers, purposefully locate themselves outside of certain countries that they serve. So maybe you want to be aware of that. And lastly, of course, what are their policies with regard to privacy and security? If you choose to use a VPN because you don't trust your ISP as much, well, then what are the privacy and security standards of that VPN? And then, of course, you have to bring up the question about what about public Wi-Fi? So you go to an area and you want to use the public Wi-Fi. What will a VPN help? What will it do for you versus not using one? So generally, you're going to be relatively safe with the information that you transfer back and forth with different services you would use on the internet. If every internet service you're using uses an encrypted and authenticated connections, that means it can verify that the server it's connecting to is connected to that domain, and it does that through using HTTPS if you're going to a secure website, or TLS, which is transport layer security, which basically, when you set up connecting to an email client, you ideally would want to use this type of connection to secure your connection to your email account to be able to send mail. So if you're using all of the services that you're using, use HTTPS, use TLS, and things to secure and authenticate themselves, you're pretty safe with information being transferred, and you know that you're talking to the correct server. You're not going to be directed somewhere else. Now, if you don't do that, if you're visiting sites that are HTTP, or you aren't using encrypted connections to your email server, you could be redirected to a fake site. Emails could be directed to a fake site, or your information could potentially be collected. So it's very important to try to use services that are use encrypted authenticated connections, HTTPS, or setting up TLS for email clients and things of that nature. But in this situation, a VPN on a public Wi-Fi, a VPN can help secure that traffic that's not already protected. Again, it protects it up to the point of the VPN, but not after. And we'll look at a diagram that explains that in a little bit more detail. Now, a VPN also hides the sites that you're visiting. So for example, even though your information is safe on a public Wi-Fi, someone could know what sites you're visiting. Again, not necessarily the pages or the information being transferred, but what is the site X, site Y, site Z you are visiting. Now, to help obfuscate some of this or hide it, you can try using a different DNS service provider. So for example, there is a service provider. It's called 1.1.1.1 that prides itself on privacy of the information. So in lieu of using a VPN, you could consider using this to help hide some of the sites that you're visiting if you're on things like public Wi-Fi networks or from your ISP. So that's another consideration you may want to take into account if you don't want to use a VPN service. Now, not using a VPN, again, like I've said, will reveal the sites you visit, but not the information transferred, if those services you're communicating with are using encrypted and authenticated connections. Okay, so let's look at this visual example to kind of give a little bit of context. So let's say you're visiting an HTTP website and not using a VPN. So you have your device, it could be a mobile device or it could be your computer or laptop. And when you connect to that HTTP site, your connection is not encrypted. So anyone can see the site you're visiting, the page you're going to, the information transferred, if any, to that HTTP site. And that site can also know your IP address, maybe not necessarily of your device, but at least of the router you're coming from. So that's a little caveat. But basically, it can know and track all that information. So how does a VPN make things look different? Well, number one, from your device to the VPN, all the traffic is encrypted. So no one can see. So if you're accessing an HTTP site, no one can see the information that you're transferring, if any. In addition, the sites that you're visiting are hidden from the ISP or the public Wi-Fi, so they have no idea what you're doing. They just know that you connected to this VPN server or service. Now, like I said, a VPN only protects or offers security up to the point of the VPN. If at that point you go to the VPN and then you travel down to the HTTP site, there your traffic is not going to be encrypted. So if there's anyone between the VPN and the HTTP site, they can see exactly what you're doing. One additional benefit that the VPN provides, though, is it does mask your IP address. So generally you're coming from it shows you coming from a different IP address, one of the VPN, not the IP of your device. So it does give you a little additional privacy here, even though your connection is not encrypted at this stage. All right, so how do things change when visiting a HTTPS website? So if you contact the HTTPS site directly, all your communication with it is encrypted, but you can see the sites that you're visiting. So your ISP or public Wi-Fi could know the sites you're visiting. With a VPN, still encrypted, but your sites are hidden from the ISP because you're going over a essentially doubly encrypted connection to the VPN. They can't see what you're doing. So again, the VPN affords you a little bit more privacy for your ISP and for public Wi-Fi networks. In terms of knowing the sites you visit, they can no longer see those. But again, your VPN knows what sites you visit, so it kind of depends on who you trust. So after the traffic goes to the VPN, it then passes on to the HTTP site. The encryption is maintained, and again, the VPN has a privacy benefit whereby the IP address you're coming from is essentially masked. It doesn't show you coming from the IP address of your device. So that is another benefit of the VPN. Okay, so going back to the question, should you use a VPN? So yes, if privacy in terms of the site you visit is important to you. So that's one thing that they can do, is help protect an ISP or the public Wi-Fi network you're connecting to, knowing what sites you visit. If that's important to you, you could use a VPN, although know that your VPN will now have that information and know the sites you visit. Should you use a VPN? Yes, if you don't want the sites you visit to know your IP address. So again, it affords you a little bit more anonymity or privacy, because they won't know the IP address of your device. So you could look like you're coming from New York when you reside in Los Angeles, for example. So if you want to do that for the services that you visit, you can use a VPN for that purpose. Should you use a VPN? Yes, if you visit websites or use services not using encrypted and authenticated connections. In other words, if you use a lot of websites that you only use HTTP, this can afford you some additional protections, particularly if you're on a lot of public Wi-Fi networks and things of that nature. So it can give you some additional protections, but again, mentioning before, it doesn't encrypt the whole way. Right after the VPN, it goes through not encrypted. Okay. And the other benefit of a VPN is that it allows you to try and avoid geo restrictions. So if some country or some organization doesn't want you to access a particular service, by connecting to a VPN, you might be able to get around some of those restrictions potentially. So that's a potential consideration if you wanted to use a VPN. Okay. So that's pretty much the content I was going to present for this. So at this point, I welcome any questions you have. So feel free to type in the chat and I will respond to them. While I wait to see if there are any questions coming up, I mentioned about upcoming shows. So we do this show every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Oops, I need to update that for the next Friday. So next Friday, we're going to be having another presentation on a technology topic related to fundraising, nonprofits, and advancement. So if you have any suggestions for upcoming shows, please feel free to mention it in the chat, or you can just leave a comment to this YouTube video and we will take it into account and put it for an upcoming show. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat at this time, so we will go ahead and start closing out. So if you want to get notifications of future episodes, please be sure to visit advtech.tv. Here you can sign up to receive email notifications, and we send them out once shows have been produced and published to YouTube, as well as let you know what the plans are for the upcoming week's show. Alternatively, you can choose to subscribe via YouTube. And we also welcome any likes you'd like to give this video, and any comments or questions you have, please do that as well, because we are looking to try and grow our audience. And with that, I think we are done. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you next Friday.